Well, welcome to the podcast, guys. Today, I have got an exciting interview where we talk about the mTOR pathway. We talk about AMPK pathway and autophagy. So we talk about these nutrient sensing pathways, how they impact longevity, inflammation, mitochondrial health, and so much more. We talk all about intermittent fasting, different fasting strategies that you can apply to help improve your overall health. And I have got Dr. William Shu, and he went to Cornell University for college and he received his medical degree from Mount Sinai School of Medicine. He completed his internal medicine residency training at Yale School of Medicine and completed his fellowship training in endocrinology and metabolism at Harvard Medical School. He was assistant professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. After 20 years of a distinguished career as an endocrinologist at Harvard's Joslin Diabetes Center, he joined L-Nutra in 2019 as chief medical officer. In his role, Dr. Shu leads the clinical development effort at L-Nutra. He oversees the medical affairs department and advances the education and adoption of fasting and fasting-mimicking diet as an innovative tool to extend human health span. So really powerful stuff, guys. You guys are going to really enjoy this interview. With Dr. Shu, he has so many great points that he discusses in here. I love how we talk about, like a nutrient sensing, these kind of nutrient sensors in our system. And, it's just powerful information that you guys are going to love. Now, I will say that I don't fully agree with everything that he says here. In fact, I'm a huge advocate of intermittent fasting. And, when you are in your eating window, I'm a big fan of consuming a lot of protein, particularly animal-based protein. He's more of an advocate of a plant-based diet, which is fine if it works for you. But I find that most people do really well with implementing intermittent fasting, time-restricted feeding, having a short eating window, somewhere in that 6 to 8 hour eating window, and implementing good quality grass-fed, organic animal products. So I find that is very, very powerful. And I also think that you can get many of the benefits that are associated with a fasting mimicking diet or an extended fast with regular extended intermittent fasting, such as doing like a 18-hour fast on a regular basis and then a 20 to 24-hour fast once a week and incorporating exercise at the end of the fast. One of my key strategies for really driving up more autophagy in your system, doing deep fasted exercise, again, where you're fasted in like a 20 to 24 hour time period, and then implementing exercise there, high intensity exercise, making sure you're hydrated, of course, right? And that's a way to really stimulate more autophagy, more cell turnover, breakdown, and regeneration, more cell recycling. And so, again, I don't agree with everything he said, but the conversation is fascinating. You guys are going to love this. And, I love what L-Nutra is doing with all the research. So we definitely want to support them and shower them with love. They are key players in this industry and getting this information out about fasting, about utilizing fasting as a tool for anti-aging, for reducing inflammation, and supporting overall metabolic and immune health. And so we've got to get this information out. There's not a whole lot of people that are doing research. It's hard to get funding for this sort of research. And so L-Nutra is really helping with that, right? And I think we're all so intrigued to learn more about things like when autophagy starts, which I talk about in this interview. Towards the end of the interview, Dr. Shu and I have a discussion about that. So check that out, guys. You guys are going to love this. Be sure, if you haven't already, to give us a review, 5-star review on Apple iTunes or Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this. Give us a review. And guys, let's jump into this podcast. Dr. Shu, welcome to the podcast.
David, thank you for having me on your show.
For sure. And let's get started by talking about health span. This is something you've studied in great detail. And most people, when they think about longevity, they just think about a number, right? They think about, hey, I want to live till I'm 90, 95, whatever it is. They're not really considering health span. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, everybody talks about living long, but it's actually the whole idea of health span is not a foreign concept, right? As we look around the people that are our loved ones, we don't hate to see them old and suffer, right? So for their conditions and from their chronic illnesses, what we really like to see is they live long, healthy. And that's really the idea of health span, is the amount of time you spend living while healthy.
Yeah.
And that ought to be our goal, not just living longer.
Yeah. And how do we define that? Because I mean, the reality is that people are living longer these days, but people are spending a lot of time in a nursing home, assisted living, on many medications, and really just not, like I think about my wife's grandfather, and he lived till he was, I believe, 86, but I mean, he was on so many medications, kidney failure, heart failure, all these types of things. I mean, literally 20 years, modern medicine kept him alive, but he wasn't really thoroughly enjoying his life. He was going to doctor's appointments, a few times a week. I mean, at the end, he was nearing dialysis. I mean, he was just hanging on. Medicine was keeping him alive. Thank God for that. We were happy for that, but he wasn't really thriving.
And David, there was such a good insight. It was the modern medicine that kept people alive. It wasn't the basic functions of the body that kept them alive, right? So it wasn't how you took care of yourself that kept you alive. It was all the medications, and that is the difference. There are built-in mechanisms in our body that help us to age gracefully and age healthy, and that's what I think. I think the 21st century scientists are always looking for that answer now.
Yeah, because we want to be 80, 85 years old, being able to go and pick up our grandchildren, right? Play with them, play golf, play in recreational activities, things like that. That's really when we're enjoying great health span. And so, that's why this is such an important topic, because people are living longer, but people aren't healthy, right? And so they're suffering. There's a lot of years of suffering there at the end of their life. And so let's talk about the role of nutrition and how that impacts our health span.
It's no surprise that we are what we eat, and how everyday nutrition plays into that. That's not a debate. I think everybody understands if you eat crappily, you're not going to expect to live healthy long. But there's also the flip side of the coin, that is, yes, we know that we should eat well, we should eat healthily every single day, but it is difficult to do. Right? Same thing. Yeah, we know, for example, that we should not be overweight, but today 70% of Americans are either overweight or obese. So we know it's not just about the knowledge, is how do we get there? How do we do it? Is there ways where we don't have to spend 24/7 doing, because that's yet another burden to life, right? And so are there new ideas? Are there new thoughts, new ways to tap into resources that we already have, that gives us the opportunity to live healthy long without a commitment to more time, more energy, more dedications that we know so well that we need to do, but we can't get to it?
Yeah, for sure. So, we always say you are what you eat, and you are what you eat and absorb. Nutrition does play such a critical role in getting the right types of foods. But like you said, the actual creating the habits and creating the rituals are what's so important. And if there's ways that we can streamline the process, obviously that's always advantageous as well. And you and I are both huge advocates of fasting. And there's a lot of different ways to implement fasting. I talk a lot on this show about intermittent fasting. We've also touched on extended fasting. There's also time restricted eating. And can you go and kind of give us like the differential and kind of break down these different types of fasting strategies? And then also how fasting can be a core tool that we can use to help reduce inflammation and to improve our health span?
That's a great question, David. Fasting is both old and new, right? So we think about fasting, it's actually, if you look at carefully around all the biological world around us, most animals practice a lot of fasting, right?
Yeah.
Foraging and hunting, they happen when, like, if you look at all the big cats, they hunt when they're hungry, and in between hunting, they go fasting. And because that's really the rule of nature. The nature of the rule of nature is never that. It wasn't supposed to be that we have a metal box inside where it's stocked with available food for 24/7, right?
Yeah.
That wasn't the nature's intent. The nature's intent is that that most of the time we go through periods of fasting.
Yeah.
And then when the body needs the food, then we go and forage and gather and hunt. And that's the way it was supposed to be. So anyway, all the way from simple organisms such as yeast to fruit flies to rats to mammals to humans, that was supposed to be the rule that governs the body, right? The how the body functions. That's all changed with the invention of electricity. That's all changed with the invention of refrigeration. Now we have all this fast access to food. So let's talk about what nature really designed us to do. Uh, the sun rises in the morning and sets in the evening. The body has a built-in clock that is supposed to wake up. Your gut or your body is supposed to be eating and active during the daytime. And when we go to bed, there's supposed to be, when the sun sets, there's supposed to be no food. That's has always been the way. In fact, in 2017, the Nobel Prize was given to 3 scientists that discovered the biologic clock. Inside every cell, not just in the brain, every cell actually has genes that encode for these time concept within the cells. And they are largely synced up with the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun. That is a concept called time-restricted eating. When the sun rises, you eat. When the sun sets, you don't eat. And that's, in fact, one of the most popular fasting regimen that your listener probably have heard of or are practicing. Okay. And so that's time restricted eating. And generally people do something like, for example, 12-12. Simply means 12 hours of eating, 12 hours of no eating. Or if you have some metabolic goals, like you want to lose weight, you have very specific goals you want to achieve, you can extend that fasting period from 12 to 14 to 16. Some people even do 18, right? So that means you're not so much concerned about exactly what you eat, although it's a good idea to always pay attention to what you put in your mouth. But the new dimension to the conversation is what's the timing of your meal rather than what are you putting in your mouth.
Yeah. That's
really the differentiation. So that really ushered in the whole this new trend of what's called intermittent fasting. So the time restricted eating is one type of intermittent fasting. There are other types of intermittent fasting. By the word definition, intermittent, it means you're not fasting for a long period of time. You're doing that intermittently. So another type of intermittent fast is called the alternate day fasting, where you're alternating fasting and then you eat, and then the next day you eat, and then the next day you fast. Sounds great. A lot of my patients find it very difficult to do. Okay, because it means you gotta go through these kind of cycles, right? Eating, no eating, eating, no eating. Yeah. And there's definitely studies to show that they help with weight loss. They help to support metabolism. But for a lot of people, they find it more difficult. There's also something called the 5-2 fasting. That's also a type of intermittent fasting. Yeah. And so we're just 2 days out of the week, you're either on those 2 days, non-consecutive days, you fast either no calories or you take something like anywhere that's less than 500, 800 calories. Yeah. And so those would be constituting your a fasting day. And then the next day or the non-fasting day, you just eat normally. And that seems to be a little bit more acceptable in the sort of the common culture. So those are what we call intermittent fasting.
Yeah. Now, what is different between that and then like when does extended fasting actually start?
Yeah, David, that's a really good question. If you think about many of the cultures of the world, right, from European cultures, and American cultures, and European, sort of Asian cultures and African culture, every culture has some sort of fasting components to it. Actually, every religion has a component of fasting, and those are typically these extended fasts for a couple of days. They just drink water. And tradition in these cultures and in these religious practices said that it not only cleanses your body, but also sharpens your focus. And then also reportedly have a lot of spiritual benefits as well. Those are what we're talking about. Generally, these are consecutive fasting for more than 2 days. And that's how we differentiate it from the intermittent fasting. Now, in terms of the effect of how does the benefits of intermittent fasting, how does it differ from these long fasts? I think it's so important for our listeners to know. While intermittent fasting is really great for weight loss, right? Intermittent fast is great for metabolic goals.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the deep cellular impacts, the healthy aging impact really comes from mostly from the periodic fast.
Mm.
And how do we know this? We see this plenty in the animal studies. When you do intermittent fast, they lose weight and they have less fat, they have less visceral fat, and a lot of their metabolic markers get better. But when you talk about elongation of the health span, when we're talking about improvement of that aging process, and many of the cellular benefits that we talk about that we know so much associated with the fasting, those are really they really belong to the extended fasting world.
And some of those cellular benefits, some of the core components there, you're talking about autophagy, right? And really ramping up autophagy. And I'll let you talk about that. And also ketone production and mitochondrial biogenesis really get driven up as you get kind of beyond that second day. Is that correct? And can you explain those in more detail?
That's exactly right. Just think about, in a world where there's no refrigeration in the natural world, right? Where you actually have to go out and hunt and gather to get these food resources. Nature has designed it so that the body can withstand those extended period of time where there's no food available. And think about that. How does the body do that? Well, the body does it in several ways. One is to say, hey, instead of all the organisms dying during times of no food, the selection process is so developed that when there's no food, the body says, hey, you know what? There's a stress to the body. All the cells says, hey, there's no food coming in. So we got to anticipate. How do we do this? Now, well, we've got some stored materials in the body, right? One way is to say, let's tap into those fat storage that we've accumulated calories for a long time. And a lot of it are visceral fats, right? These are fats inside the belly. Let's use them. So that's one way. So we begin to convert the source of calories from starchy food more to the fat that's in our body. That sounds like a great story, right? When you don't have food available to be taken outside, you tap into your own fat reserve and use them as a source. That's a great story. We should do more of that in America, right? We should do more of that in modern society. Number two, on the cells level, the cell says, hey, look, there's no nutrients coming in. Okay. Yes, we can tap into the fats, but we also got a clean house, meaning that are there part of the cells, each cell, that are a little bit older, a little bit more worn out, that's a little less functional? Let's take them, let's sacrifice them first and break them down and use it to build new ones. That cellular recycling. I'm not talking about elimination of one cell for another. I'm talking about inside the cell, the cleaning, the cellular cleanse. That there's a term called autophagy, and that's what that is. It's that replacement of older and more worn out parts, cellular parts for new ones. That term, the autophagy, the whole process had won the Nobel Prize in 2016. And it turns out that it's such a universal stress of no food coming to the body that almost every cell in the body goes through that kind of recycling. And so so the fasting has such a universal impact on the cells in the body. It doesn't only affect your fat cell. It does not only affect your muscle cells, but it affects almost every cell in the body. And that's really the new discovery that science was able to uncover what nature has designed.
Yeah, so powerful. Thinking about how autophagy really regenerates these cells from the inside, or the cellular components from the inside. And, it's really the body's it needs amino acids and it needs proteins. And, when we're not getting them dietarily, right, it's going to find them in kind of these, the damaged components of the cell. And the unique thing, what's so interesting too, is that, it's really the vitalistic kind of innate intelligence of the body that knows which areas are defective, right? to actually
Yeah.
target first, to break down the damaged areas before the healthier regions of the cell.
It's also amazing that if you look at the cellular mechanism, even though, across the animal species, even from insects and even from worms, we're so different. But there's something that are so fundamental. These survival mechanism really hasn't changed too much, from yeast
Yeah.
to worms to rats to mammals to humans. I mean, these are in the nature survival mechanism that has been designed and built into our body.
Yeah, so interesting. And so when we look at kind of the building and the cleansing or repairing process of the body, we think about, we kind of simplify it a little bit, but we think about two major pathways. We think about the mTOR pathway in the body, and we think about the AMPK pathway, which is kind of associated with autophagy. And so what, it's as we, are developing, we're cycling through these, but our current modern day lifestyle kind of pushes us into an mTOR dominance, right? A kind of a state of mTOR dominance. Can you explain that and, how we shift out of that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. There is a clear intersection between nutrition, fasting, and healthy aging. And intersection is this. When there's a lot of nutrients coming to the cells, what do the cells do? They say, hey, there's plenty of fuel. Let's grow. Let's get big. Let's multiply, right? And because that's what nutrients do. And but in our modern day, I mean, we don't need that. Meaning that
unless you're a child or pregnant woman, right?
That's exactly right. When you're middle aged, like me.
Yeah, you and me,
So I don't need to grow sideways. I don't need to have more cells, right? So instead, what we need is from time to time, the body needs to clean up itself, right? And so, but how do the cells know if there's nutrients or not to tell them to grow or not? Well, there are these nutrient sensors in the body. They're like the eyes and the ears and the nose. They sense nutrients. What do they sense? They sense amino acids. They sense glucose. They sense proteins, carbohydrates. So if you give them a lot every day, they will never have time to say, hey, it's time to clean up, because it's always time to grow, right? It's like a busy kid, right? Enamored with all the stimuli of life, it never has a chance to rest. And we know in a long time, the kid is going to be stressed out because there's too much stimuli, right?
Yeah.
So that's exactly what happened to the cell. The cells actually needs time of resting, needs time to say there's no food. I give you another analogy. It's almost like we say, oh, exercise is great for you. Really? What if you exercise 24/7 for 7 days? You will crash. Why? Because it's too much of a good thing. You need to have break from rest, from exercise. You need break so that the muscle could be healed.
Right. Because exercise is really catabolic. A lot of people think they're building muscle when they're exercising, and they may feel a pump, right? They may get more blood flow in there that makes it feel like that, but they're not actually building muscle. They're actually tearing it down. It's the recovery process where they build, as long as they're getting enough nutrients and rest.
And that's the same thing when we fast, right? The cells are cleaning, they're breaking it down. And it's the refeeding phase that follows the fasting that allows the body to say, okay, now we cleaned house. We've got rid of all the excesses, the older, the more worn out. Now let's feed the body with good nutrients. So it's that repeated cycles of fasting and feeding that is so fundamental to health span.
Yeah, so important. Yep, and that's real ancestral. Our ancestors, when food was available, they ate and ate a lot, right? They feasted. And when food wasn't available, they were in a time of famine, right? And like you said, they didn't get weaker, right? They actually got stronger, more primed, and they would be more effective hunters, more effective at gathering because their senses were heightened. There's a lot of physiological changes that take place when you're in that not starvation state, but hungry state.
That's exactly right. So let's come back to the mTOR and the PK. Yeah. So because now when there is no signals coming to the body, then these ears and eyes and nose, these sensors gets downregulated, meaning they get shut down. That means they're not seeing these nutrients. That means they're telling the cells, anticipate, a period of no food. Okay, so I don't know, David. I mean, a lot of our listeners probably have gone through some tough time with COVID,
Yeah.
maybe through employment, maybe through company sort of has a budget constraint. Think about that. That's a stress to the organization. There's no revenue coming in. What does the company do? The company says, "Hey, we better shape up. Is there fats we can trim? Is there excesses where it's not, operationally what's not efficient? Let's
Mm,
fix that." And then when that reduced revenue is extended for a long period of time, the company might have to readjust
right.
workforce, right? That's exactly what happens to the body. When these mTOR signals, when these PKA, the protein kinase signals, and when IGF signals is reduced, the cell says, okay, we're in this state of stress. And then we got to look for sources of energy. Let's tackle the ones that are worn out and
Mm,
older and recycle them, right? But obviously, every cell needs that period because that forces the cell to say, okay, I got to make a choice now. I got to clean up right now. If we don't fast, if we constantly eat 24/7, and we always eat plenty throughout the year, we never give our body the chance to say, hey, what are the worn out? What are the older components of the cells? You know, we miss the chance for that cellular cleanse.
yeah. So critical. And so the other interesting thing that happens too is we actually not only do we repair our mitochondria, and the mitochondria are your energy sensors and energy producers within the cell, but we can increase the amount of mitochondria within the cells. And why does the body do that?
Well, I mean, it's almost like you have a sponge. You're wringing it dry,
Mm-hmm.
and then you provide water. What does it do? It expands it. It
Right.
sucks up all the good stuff, and then it's that repeated cycle, and that's why fasting itself is by itself is never the solution. If you just deplete the cells and you don't give all the
Yeah.
good stuff back, then it's not good. But if you deplete the cells of these older type, and then afterwards followed by a good, clean nutrition,
Mm,
more plant-based food, following the fasting, then obviously you're going to enhance the function of many of these things that you have ditched and now you needed to replace.
yeah.
And that is the secret to why, if you look around the blue zone regions of the world, these people who live greater than 100 years old, the centenarians, fasting had always been part of their they did not intentionally fast. It was just the challenges of making a living, sort of the
Yeah.
environment does not provide 24/7 all around food. And so as part of their tradition, as part of the environment, the pressure the environment placed on these centenarians, that's part of their lifestyle. It's characterized by a mix of intermittent fasting through time restricted eating. When the
Yeah.
sun rises, they eat. When the sun sets, they don't eat. And also by these periodic fasting where they are focused on either a religious goal or on a health
Mm,
goal or goals that or just pressures exerted by their environment where they have to go
yeah.
without food for a little while.
Yeah. It's just kind of something that cultures have adopted, right? Something that they've done. Again, like you said, either due to religious reasons, cultural reasons, health benefits, or just the stressors of the environment. So let's talk about the fasting mimicking diet is an interesting strategy. I know that's you're working with L-Nutra, who has really taken this approach and done a tremendous amount of research to help us understand the benefits of fasting and extended fasting. And so let's talk about this fasting mimicking approach.
Yeah. I think it's easiest to understand if we continue with the analogy that we used. Let's say if a company is facing a shortfall in the revenue, and would it be better if the company makes no money for the next month, or if we give them a little bit of money? Not because the company now is going to exercise in just making sure that everything runs more efficiently. If
Yeah.
you need $1 million to run and you have $0, that's going to be really stringent
Yeah.
on the company. It's going to be really tough. But what if they're able to figure out $100,000, or $200,000 is nowhere near the $1 million they were making. A little bit of nutrient is going to go a long way to support essential functions of that organization. That's really the intention of the fasting mimicking diet. During a prolonged fasting, even though we talked about many of the benefits, for some people, it's just too hard to do, number one. Number two, it could be too unsafe for a lot of our listeners to do because of their other, health concerns. And so by giving nutrients that fall below these detection level of these nutrient sensors that we spoke about, scientifically calculated, formulated to provide nutrients below the nutrient sensor of these eyes and ears of the cells. So while the body sees some nutrients to help them to sustain this period of fasting, those nutrients are not recognized by the cells. So the cells can still go through those times of autophagy, going through that cycle, because it's just not enough to trigger their sensors.
Yeah. So there's basically like a threshold
yes
of nutrients you need. And this is a common question. People are always asking me, what breaks a fast, right? How many calories, what can I consume? What actually breaks a fast? We don't have real hard science on that, on like what actually breaks a fast. However, we do understand that there's kind of a certain threshold, which it's a floating threshold for each individual, but I believe kind of the scientific consensus is somewhere less than 40% of like your normal calorie load, stretched out over like, a portion of days will suppress these sensors. Is that correct?
Well, I think that's an overgeneralization. I think the story is very complex, right? It is really not just calories. Calories is one component, but also the
certain
nutrient
macronutrients.
That's right. But not only that, but also how you what's the mixes of the food you're putting together, because eventually is the speed at which the cells are seeing these nutrients, not just the total amount, right? So how much food or nutrients are they seeing at a given time? So there is also a time factor there as well.
Right.
And so how do you mix the food? What's the macronutrients? What's the total calories? And also perhaps there may be a different threshold for different goals that you need to stress. For example, if you're looking to support healthy aging versus a very specific health goals, maybe there could be some different threshold as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the fasting mimicking diet is something I lump in this category of partial fasting, where it's, not a true strict fast. And it's in the extended fasting category because traditional approach is basically roughly 5 days, which gives you, is an extended fasting approach, but it's less calories and it's low glycemic foods, because we know foods that are higher glycemic, you're going to really bump up your insulin. And insulin is one of these key hormone sensors. It's going to activate more of that mTOR pathway. It's going to inhibit autophagy. So we've got to keep insulin under control. It's also lower in protein, because we know that protein and a lot of free form amino acids are going to activate the mTOR pathway as well. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I prefer to use the term not partial, but I call them a molecular or cellular fast.
Okay.
I really look at it as different kinds of fast. The term fast in our lingo, in our language, means no food. It's a behavioral fast, meaning that I'm not putting any food in my mouth.
Yeah.
But to the cells, it's not so much. There's always nutrients flowing in the body, by the way. So the cell, right, always, even when you're completely fasting, there's still nutrients going. It's really a matter of the threshold. And so if you give nutrients below that detection threshold, it's cellular fast. The cells are in a fasting state. Yeah. So that's a concept. I think, how does the fasting mimicking diet sounds like an oxymoron? How do you have fast and food together, right? But unless you really understand on the cell side, it's always seeing nutrients. Even if you're fasting, you're still seeing some nutrients.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So it's really a matter of threshold. So how do you bump up the threshold so that it becomes a nourished fast? that's where we've taken what science has, what nature has designed, and how we've used science to develop, to hack this molecular fast definition, so we can help people, many more people, to take on the benefits, to receive the benefits of prolonged fast without actually going through the burden or the danger of a prolonged fast.
Right. And so let's talk about how the fasting, like the actual mechanics of the fasting mimicking diet. So somebody orders the Prolon 5-day pack, they get their food in, these little boxes, and, they start consuming it. So let's talk about the mechanics of it. Like how many meals per day, roughly calories, rough macronutrients, what
Yeah.
makes it, so effective. And obviously you guys have done a lot of research on it. And I'm sure you've had a lot of different iterations to really dial it in. So like
Yeah.
what have you learned through that process, and how do the mechanics work with it?
Yeah, let's begin by maybe going over a little bit of the story, the birthplace of this
Yeah,
concept. This really started with Professor Walter Longo,
right.
who is a scientist, and he had looked into, all his passion was around the intersection between nutrition, longevity, and fasting. And he really was able to figure out, wow, a lot of these pathways are activated or inactivated, can be activated or inactivated through nutrient manipulation. And he also realizes that how difficult it is to get people to adopt a fasting regimen. And think about, like, if we go on vacation, we say, oh, it's going to be beautiful location and beautiful hotel, but guys, no food. I mean, that's a
Yeah,
terrible vacation, right? And food is such into it's so much integrated into our culture.
sure.
So I think the creativity and the ingeniousness of the fasting mimicking diet approach is, how do we provide nutrition that gives you many of the benefits of fasting, rather than let's go and fast. Of course, if you can do it, go ahead and do it. If it's safe for you to do it, go ahead and do it.
Mhm.
But for many people, it's much easier. And so can we give you a nutrition solution that has many of the benefits? And therefore we can apply that fasting is good for everybody. And that's really our goal. So the mechanic is this. So the first day, actually it's a 5-day journey. So each day you only consume the food that's inside the Prolon package.
Yeah.
Okay. You just add water. There's soup in there. There's crackers. There are vitamins in there. There are specially formulated L drink there to help to preserve your muscle mass during the prolonged fasting period. Everything is thought through, in terms of how much nutrients, how much micronutrients, how much macronutrients, how many calories there is. First day is kind of your intro day, is the easier
Yeah.
day. It's got more nutrition than day 2 through day 5. But with each day, first day when you consume that, you're getting body ready for the cellular process. You're probably using some of the glycogen stored in your liver. By second day, you're shifting into fat burning, and most of that fat is going to be your visceral fat.
Yeah.
And somewhere between second and third day is probably where autophagy happens, that cellular cleanse happening.
Mhm.
And you cannot just start autophagy and say we're done. I mean, you got to let it clean. You got to let the cleaning take place for a couple of days, and that's where 3, 4, 5 days really occur. And then we generally, after the 5 days, now your body has gone through that cleanse, cellular cleanse. Now it's time for refeeding, and this
Yeah.
is where we welcome those who fasted to really pay attention to reintroduce good, clean food back to their body.
Yeah. And because also through that autophagy process, the body also says, all right, we need new cells. Like we need some new young cells in here to replace some of these old damaged cells that we really didn't have the energy to repair, or wasn't worth it to repair. So it starts to increase stem cell production. And then that refeeding process starts to really feed and strengthen those stem cells.
I think this is an active area of research. We
Yeah.
do see plenty of that in the lower forms of organisms.
Yep.
The big question is, how far does that occur in humans,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
what are its implications in many of the disease conditions? L-Nutra is committed to doing these type of research to further our understanding of how prolonged fasting can modulate these disease processes. But this is a serious discussion when you're talking about disease prevention and treatment. And I think a lot more research needs to be done at the moment. And we're one of those major forces that is investing the efforts to look into that very important aspect.
Yeah, yeah. Well, absolutely. When it comes to any sort of disease claims or anything like that. And we also know some of the magic that comes in that process is the production of ketones. So the body starts breaking down fat for fuel, and most of the cells can utilize fatty acids as an energy source. And it's a really great energy source, very energy efficient, very clean, less oxidative stress that's produced when you burn fat for fuel as opposed to burning glucose for fuel. However, we can't get those fatty acids up across the blood-brain barrier. So when we're in a time where we're not getting a whole lot of nutrients, we need an alternative fuel source to glucose to get into the brain. And that's where the liver will convert fatty acids into ketones, a water-soluble molecule, smaller molecule that can get into the blood-brain barrier. And those ketones really have a powerful effect on brain physiology. And this is one of the reasons why, a lot of religious traditions, spiritual traditions, people have experienced really great mental clarity, breakthroughs. When they're in that fasted state, these ketones suppress inflammatory pathways in the brain and really provide a great clean energy source in the brain.
I think that's really an exciting area.
Yeah.
There have been a lot of research looking into how does the alternative fuel source, such as ketones and fats, change the way health is being supported, and how that could modulate disease progression or prevention. Very, very exciting. I mean, even if you look into the medical research literature, today versus 3 years ago, we have a lot more investigators, a lot more researchers devoting their energy looking into this than even 3 years ago. It's an exciting time to be.
Very exciting. Yep. Now, obviously you guys are doing a lot of research with the fasting mimicking diet. And you guys have been using this now just in clinical settings with people, literally all over the world. What kind of results are you guys seeing on a regular basis?
Yeah, I think, maybe for the purpose of this podcast, let's focus on what it does for the general consumers who are healthy and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Because the disease areas really remain an intensive area for investigation.
Of course.
Now, I would say there are 4 different levels of impact for people who are seeking healthy aging process. So the first is the most obvious one. That is, after a couple of cycles of Prolon, you're going to see your waist circumference reduce, your girth is going to reduce. That is such a good news because, the central fat, the body's abdominal fat, right? The fat in the belly does all kinds of bad stuff, right? We actually want to reduce the fats inside our belly. We know that fasting preferentially uses fat instead of muscle as a source of fuel.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't realize this. When you are losing weight from a low calorie from all kinds of sources, just low calorie in general, when you lose weight, you're losing muscle weight as well as much as you're losing fat weight.
Yeah.
However, when you do these prolonged fasting, because there's stress, when there's stress, a lot of the stress hormone is going to go up. Stress hormone, including the growth hormone, is going to preserve the muscle mass. And so that's a different mechanism than a 2 months of low calorie diet where you're going to lose a lot of muscle mass. The fasting, it's a fat driven weight loss. You're going to lose the fat, you're going to preserve the lean body mass, especially with Prolon, especially formulated to drive that result. So that's the number one you're going to see. Weight loss, fat driven weight loss. Number 2.
Yeah.
You're going to see cellular impact. Because of these repeated cycles of fasting and nourishment, as we talked a little bit earlier, your overall markers of general nutrition status as reflected in IGF-1 is actually going to be lower. And we have studies to show that. That means that, wow, even you're just doing 5 days a month, your IGF-1 level is lower. And that's a great global signal to say, Don't grow all the time. Take a
Mm.
break from time to time. And you just need 5 days to drive that kind of results, which is really gospel to
Yeah.
a lot of the listeners.
Yeah. What's interesting is that human growth hormone and IGF-1 usually are coupled together. However, when we're fasting, we're elevating growth hormone, which helps preserve lean body mass, bone tissue, muscle tissue, but we're suppressing that IGF-1, which is kind of elevating the overall growth and cell reproduction.
And that's absolutely right. David, you're an expert on this.
I
Like,
love this topic. I actually wrote a book on fasting transformation. So yeah, I love this stuff.
yeah, this is absolutely right. So that's the second level, that lowering the IGF-1, signaling that the cells are responding to the metabolic environment in a different way. Number three, it's the sort of the emotional aspect. A lot of people fast and they realize, hey, I have more mental clarity. I have more focus. My energy is better.
Yeah.
And it's not surprising if you look at if you're a fan of National Geographic, which I am. I watch these
Yeah.
big cats all the time. Hey, when they're fasting, they're never tired. Think about it. They're never, oh,
Yeah.
I'm too hungry to hunt. Never, never. When they're hungry and when they go through fasting, what happens? It triggers their instinct for hunting.
Yeah.
So their
senses are
brain, they have to be activated.
Yeah.
If every time they go through a fasting period, they say, oh, forget it, I lose interest in life,
They're dead.
the species would have gone extinct a
Yeah.
long time ago. So a lot of people go through these periodic fasting, these prolonged fasting. They have increased energy, they have mental clarity. And then the fourth impact that prolong gives you is behavior change. Why? 5 days where you're divorcing from your addicted food, whatever it is. It changed the chemistry, it changes the relationship with food. So much so that after 5 days, the most common question people ask is, Dr. Shu, what do I eat now? Because I've gone through this journey. I felt better. I know that I have abused my body before. Now I'm ready to make a change after 5 days. I don't want to sabotage my body anymore. What do I eat? That's when people are totally motivated.
Yeah.
And so much so that we actually bought a piece of land in Long Valley, New Jersey, where we brought these non-GMO, non-genetic modified food seeds. We actually started a farm.
Oh, that's great.
So that we could provide clean nutrition, organic, sustainably farmed, no pesticides, no herbicides. And so we can send these food to people who, after they finish a 5-day fast, to go on a pescatarian or vegetarian-based diet for the next couple of days. Now, should we always eat? Well, obviously. Should we always exercise? Obviously.
Yeah.
But for those of us who are not saints, for those of you who fall short from time to time, this is a great regimen for us to kickstart our healthy living in 2022.
Now, what's a good regimen? Like, how often should somebody do a fasting mimicking diet? Obviously, it's going to be goal dependent. It's going to be dependent on a number of different variables. But what are you guys typically seeing with people, like as far as how often they're doing it?
Yeah. So if you have weight to lose, if you want to lose visceral fat, if you have a very specific goal, we ask you, monthly for about 3-4 months. You got to drive your cycle. Now, that's a general recommendation. You ought to talk to your healthcare provider, if you have any specific concerns. But once you reach your metabolic goal, you could do it as infrequently as every 3-4 months.
Yeah.
Because, it's almost like, look, you need a weekly cleaning around the house. But when spring comes, everybody's going to do a spring cleaning, right?
Yeah.
Because that's a deeper cleanse. And that's what the body, well, often I will recommend. Hey, look, if your house is totally in a mess, you got to do it more frequently. But if you really maintain your house well, then every seasonal change, that's a great time to change, to wash your curtain, to shampoo your carpet. And that's in fact what prolong does to all your cells in the body.
Yeah, I think that's great. And so, guys, if you want to try this fasting mimicking diet, what you do is basically you order the box and they send you the food. So you don't have to really think about it. You don't have any food prep, which is nice, especially when you're fasting. You don't really want to spend time doing that, which frees you up for time to do a lot of other things. And, and then it also gives you the proportions, the proper proportions, all scientifically validated, that you follow. And so you just follow this protocol, right? In this program. And, and they just kind of walk you right through the whole process. And so, it's very effective. Lots of people are doing it all over the world. And where do people find more information on this? Where do they find that?
If you're interested in this solution that we have already put together for you, you could go on to Prolong FMD. FMD
Yeah.
stands for fasting mimicking diet, prolongfmd.com.
Yeah.
There is a intermittent fasting solution,
Good.
because some people say, well, I don't want to do the 5 days. I want to do the time restricted eating through intermittent fasting. We also have something called a fast bar, the same FMD technology, and you could find out more information from fastbar.com.
Fastbar.com. So there you go. So Prolon, what was the website there?
Prolongfmd.com.
prolonfmd.com, and then also fastbar.com. So definitely check that out, guys. And I know a portion of your guys' proceeds also goes into research, just funding more and more research on these breakthroughs, because, somebody's got to fund research, and research is expensive. And so when you have a pharmaceutical product or something like that, it's a lot easier to get funding as opposed to fasting. You don't really make money teaching people not to eat, unfortunately. Therefore, there's less funding that goes into that. And so we need some sort of funding vehicle so we can really understand more of these great benefits and get more people excited and get this out into the mainstream, this sort of strategy. So I really appreciate what you guys are doing with that, and anything new and exciting that you guys are working on with that.
Well, I mean, we currently have 17 clinical trials that we're running all around the globe in various health interests. This is we're a different type of company, because we want to introduce new ways whereby people can tap into what they already have inside their bodies. And as you mentioned, I mean, there's not a lot of people doing research in this area, but thankfully there are more and more interest, because at least preliminarily, we're seeing a great results from a lot of these early trials. Do we need to do more? Of course. Do we need to understand more and deeper? That's exactly why we're committed. L-Nutra is the name of the company. So if you're interested more about our technology platform, our thought, our philosophy, and our approach to really hacking health, please check out l-nutra.com.
Yeah, that's so good. And, I would be so interested too to see more research on people that are, in a fat adapted state, right? And really, I think one of the big things that one of the common questions people are always asking is, when does autophagy start, right? And we don't really have a great way of measuring that at this point. And that's something that we'd all love to know. And it's obviously very different for each individual. And part of that difference depends on how metabolically flexible their body is, how good their body is at burning fat for fuel, and how insulin sensitive they are. And so the more insulin sensitive you are, because you're practicing this sort of lifestyle on a regular basis, you're intermittent fasting, maybe you're doing fasting mimicking diets, you're exercising, sleeping well, all those key strategies, you're going to get into a state where you are in autophagy, or at least, a certain threshold of autophagy, with a lower level of, like, you won't have to fast quite as long in order to get into that state. And we'd all be interested to know more about like where that is, right? And figuring that out. So I'm excited to see, as we get more and more research on this, some of the breakthroughs that come with it.
I think the medical world is equally intrigued, and I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about fasting.
Yeah, so good. Well, Dr. Xu, this has been a great interview. Really enjoyed our conversation here, and really want to just acknowledge all the great work that you're doing with L-Nutra, getting this research out, getting this message out. And, I always say fasting is the most ancient, inexpensive, and powerful healing strategy known to mankind, right? I mean, reality is this is something all of us can adopt to some level in our lifestyle. Of course, if you have major medical conditions, unique conditions, certainly, talk with your doctor before starting anything like this. However, it's just something at some level, whether it's time restricted feeding, like a 12-12, like you talked about, doing a fasting mimicking diet. It's just something that we want to be considering and, and looking for ways that we can implement this into our lifestyle. So thanks so much for your time. Any last words of inspiration for our audience here?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Start today. I think you don't have to wait for another year to start taking steps towards your health. I love what you said earlier. You can start with 12-12.
Yeah.
12 hours of eating, 12 hours not eating. I think that's a great way to start the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Even when my wife was pregnant, she was doing a 12-12. My kids, I have young kids, they do a 12-12, right? This is something that it's very easy to implement and a great place to start. And, if you want to take things to the next level, definitely check out the fasting mimicking diet, check out some intermittent fasting strategies, things like that. So guys, hope you enjoyed this podcast. Be sure to rate and review it. And we will see you on a future podcast. Be blessed, everybody.